Let's talk about the thing nobody wants to hear. The thing that goes against every instinct you have when someone you love goes quiet, goes cold, goes distant. The thing that feels like surrender, but is actually, if you understand the psychology beneath it, the single most powerful position you can occupy in this entire dynamic. Stop chasing. I know how that lands. I know that every part of you resists it. Because chasing feels like loving. It feels like fighting for something real. It feels like proof that you care, that you're not willing to give up, that the connection meant something. And in almost every other context in life, that instinct is correct. Persistence is rewarded. Effort is respected. Showing up repeatedly is how you demonstrate commitment. But with the avoidant nervous system, that equation is completely inverted. And until you understand why, you will keep doing the thing that feels right and getting the result that breaks you. Here is the psychological reality. The avoidant's entire internal architecture is organized around one central need: the preservation of autonomy. From early in their development, closeness became associated with the loss of self. Whether through an emotionally invasive caregiver, an unpredictable attachment figure, or an environment where their emotional needs were consistently minimized, they learned that letting someone in means losing something essential about who they are. And so the nervous system built a detection system. A finely tuned radar for anything that resembles engulfment, pressure, or the erosion of personal space. Your pursuit, however loving in its intention, lands on that radar as a 5-alarm warning. Every message sent into the silence, every attempt to explain, to reconnect, to make them understand what they're losing, each one of those gestures, regardless of how genuinely they come from love, registers in the avoidant nervous system as confirmation. Confirmation that closeness is dangerous. Confirmation that their withdrawal was justified. Confirmation that the distance they created was not only necessary but insufficient because you followed them into it. And so they go further. Not because they want to hurt you, but because the system that was built to protect them is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Now consider what happens when you stop, when the messages cease, when the silence is met with silence. When you withdraw, not in anger, not as a manipulative countermove, but as a genuine reclamation of your own space and dignity. Something shifts in the avoidant's internal world that they will almost never articulate, but that research on attachment behavior consistently confirms. The threat dissolves. The radar goes quiet. And in the absence of pursuit, something unexpected begins to surface. The avoidant's own attachment system, which was suppressed beneath the noise of defense, starts to speak. Bowlby called this the activation of the attachment behavioral system. When the perceived threat of engulfment is removed, the underlying bond, which was always there, which never actually disappeared, begins to reassert itself. The avoidant starts to feel the absence, not the absence of pressure, which is a relief, but the absence of you, which is something else entirely. Something that doesn't resolve itself through logic or time management. Something that sits quietly in the chest and refuses to be rationalized away. This is the pull that your pursuit was preventing. Every time you chased, you gave their nervous system something to push against. The moment you stop, there is nothing to push against, and the gravitational force of genuine attachment has nowhere to go but inward, toward the truth of what they actually feel. Stillness in this context is not passivity. It is not resignation. It is not giving up on love. It is the most sophisticated understanding of human attachment psychology translated into behavior. It is choosing to operate from knowledge rather than fear. It is trusting that what is real does not require you to run after it, because what is real, when given the right conditions, will always find its way back. You cannot chase someone into feeling safe with you, but you can become someone whose absence makes safety feel less important than return now. That we've established what stopping the chase actually means, not as an act of giving up, but as the most psychologically informed decision you can make. I want to take you somewhere that most people in this situation never go. Because they're too focused on the other person, too locked into monitoring the silence, analyzing the absence, measuring every signal and non-signal coming from the avoidance direction. And in doing so, they miss the most important opportunity that no contact has ever offered anyone who has found themselves in this dynamic. The opportunity to become someone completely different, not for them. For you, let me be direct about something. The version of you that was in that relationship, the version that was anxiously tracking their moods, shrinking to avoid triggering their withdrawal, expanding to fill the emotional gaps they left, walking the tightrope between too much and not enough, that version of you was not your full self. It couldn't have been. Because when you are constantly calibrating your behavior around someone else's emotional unavailability, You are not living from your center. You are living from your wound. And wounds, however understandable, however human, are not a foundation. They are a signal. A signal that something inside you needs attention that no other person can provide. This is where the philosophy becomes practical. Carl Jung wrote that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And what no contact forces if you let it, if you resist the urge to spend every hour of it obsessing over someone else's internal world, is a confrontation with your own. Who are you when you are not defined by this relationship? What do you want when what you want is not shaped by what they're willing to give? What does your life look like when you stop architecting it around someone else's limitations? These are not comfortable questions, but they are the most important ones you will ever answer. Here is what makes this directly relevant to the avoidant dynamic, and not just general self-help advice. Avoidants are, at their psychological core, deeply oriented toward autonomy and self-sufficiency. These are not flaws, they are, in many ways, genuinely admirable qualities that became extreme through necessity. The avoidant has a highly developed sense of self, a fierce independence, and an almost instinctive attraction to people who carry those same qualities. What repels them, what activates the very withdrawal we've been discussing, is emotional dependency. The sense that someone's wholeness is contingent on their presence, that without them, the other person diminishes. And here is the painful irony that most people never see clearly enough. In the pursuit phase, in the anxious monitoring phase, in the desperate reaching for connection phase, you are demonstrating exactly the dependency that the avoidant finds most threatening. Not because you are a dependent person by nature, but because love, when it's met with inconsistency, naturally produces anxiety. And anxiety, when it's chronic, starts to look like need. And need, to the avoidant nervous system, looks like the beginning of losing themselves. But a person who uses no contact to genuinely rebuild, a person who rediscovers their own ambitions, their own friendships, their own capacity for joy that has nothing to do with whether a text gets returned, that person becomes something the avoidant rarely encounters and almost cannot resist: someone who is whole, someone whose life is full on its own terms, someone who wanted to avoid genuinely and deeply but who does not need them to function, to feel worthy, to move forward. That distinction between wanting and needing is everything to the avoidant mind. Wanting is safe. Wanting says, I choose you from a place of abundance. Needing says, I require you to complete something in me. And while needing is human, while it is understandable, while it is something every one of us carries in different forms, it is also the thing that makes the avoidant feel like a life raft rather than a partner. And nobody wants to be someone's life raft, not even the people who love you. So use this time, not as a performance of moving on designed to provoke a response, not as a carefully curated display of thriving meant to be observed from a distance, but as a genuine, ruthless, compassionate excavation of who you are when no one is watching. Rebuild the friendships that got quieter when the relationship got louder. Return to the work, the art, the physical practice, the intellectual pursuit that reminds you of your own substance. Reconstruct the internal architecture of a person who knows their own value, not because someone reflected it back to them, but because they did the work of finding it themselves. Because wholeness is not a strategy, it is the destination. And the beautiful paradox is this: the moment you arrive there genuinely, the moment your fullness is real and not performed, you become exactly the kind of person the avoidant has always wanted to come home to. You were never meant to be completed by someone who is afraid of closeness. You were meant to be so complete that their fear finally had nothing to feed on. We've covered the power of stillness, what it does to the avoidance nervous system when you stop pursuing. We've talked about wholeness, what it means to use this period to rebuild yourself into someone whose life is full on its own terms. Now I want to go somewhere that most conversations about no contact completely overlook, because most advice in this space is focused outward, on them, on what they're thinking, what they're feeling, whether they miss you, whether they'll come back. And while those questions are understandable, they are also, in a very precise psychological sense, the wrong questions. Because they keep your attention pointed in the direction that is costing you the most. The most important work you can do during no contact has nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with the state of your own nervous system. Let me explain what I mean by that, because this is not abstract. This is not motivational language dressed up as psychology. This is neuroscience. This is the literal biological architecture of how human beings connect, attach, and either sustain or destroy the relationships they most want to keep. When you are in an anxious attachment response, and make no mistake, if you are in no contact with an avoidant and you are struggling, You are almost certainly in one your nervous system is operating from a place of chronic threat activation. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thought, long term perspective, and emotional regulation, goes partially offline. And the limbic system, the older, faster, more reactive part of your brain that processes threat and drives survival behavior, takes over. This is why, in the depths of no contact, you find yourself doing things that the calmer, clearer version of you would never do. Sending the message you swore you wouldn't send, checking their social media at 2 in the morning, rehearsing conversations that will never happen, oscillating between rage and grief within the same hour. That is not weakness. That is biology. That is a nervous system that was wired, through the specific texture of this relationship, to associate this person's presence with safety and their absence with danger. And once that wiring is in place, the absence doesn't just feel sad, it feels like a threat to survival, which is why the response to that so often looks less like heartbreak and more like emergency. Now, here is why this matters beyond your own well being, though your well being alone would be reason enough. The avoidant, as we have established, has a nervous system that is exquisitely sensitive to emotional dysregulation in others. They don't always consciously identify it. They don't sit down and analytically assess whether you are operating from a regulated or dysregulated state. But they feel it. The same way you can walk into a room and sense tension before a single word is spoken. The same way you know, within seconds of a phone call, whether the person on the other end is calm or barely holding it together. Emotional states transmit. They are contagious in the most literal neurological sense through tone, through word choice, through timing, through the energy that underlies every form of communication. When you reach out from a dysregulated state, when the message, however carefully worded, is written from a place of anxiety, desperation, or suppressed panic, the avoidant receives not just the words, but the frequency beneath them. And that frequency confirms everything their nervous system has been protecting them from. It says, without saying it, this person is not stable. This person needs something from me that I don't know how to give. Closeness with this person means inheriting this storm. But a regulated nervous system communicates something entirely different. It says, I am okay. I am not an emergency. I am someone you can approach without bracing for impact. And for the avoidant, for someone whose entire relational history has been shaped by the exhausting work of managing their own internal world, encountering a person who has genuinely done the work to manage theirs is not just attractive, it is rare. It is the thing they didn't know they were looking for because they had almost stopped believing it existed. So how do you regulate? Not through suppression, not through performing calm while chaos runs underneath. Suppression is transparent, and it is also deeply corrosive to your own psychological health. Real regulation comes through practice, through the deliberate, consistent cultivation of internal tools that genuinely shift your physiological state. Breathwork that activates the parasympathetic nervous system. Physical movement that metabolizes the cortisol that chronic stress produces. Meditation that trains the prefrontal cortex to stay online under pressure. Therapy, particularly somatic or attachment-focused approaches that addresses not just the thoughts you're having, but the bottom-level patterns that drive them. Journaling that externalizes the internal noise and allows you to observe your own emotional process rather than being consumed by it. These are not luxury practices. They are not optional enhancements for people who have extra time. They are the fundamental infrastructure of a person who is capable of sustaining real intimacy, with an avoidant or with anyone. Because the truth that this dynamic has the potential to teach you, if you let it, is that you cannot regulate another person's nervous system. You cannot love someone into feeling safe. You cannot be consistent enough, patient enough, or perfectly calibrated enough to override someone else's biological programming through sheer force of devotion. What you can do, the only thing that is ever truly within your control, is become someone whose own internal world is so grounded, so stable, so genuinely at peace, that being near you feels like the threat level dropping rather than rising. The avoidant doesn't need you to be perfect. They don't need you to be endlessly accommodating or strategically detached. What they need, what they have, perhaps never fully experienced, and therefore cannot fully articulate, is someone who is safe. Not safe in the sense of boring or without depth. Safe in the sense of consistent, calm beneath pressure, present without being consuming. Someone whose nervous system, when it comes into contact with theirs, says without a single word, you don't have to brace yourself here. Nothing is about to collapse. You cannot offer that from a place of dysregulation. You cannot transmit safety while you are drowning in the absence of theirs. Regulate yourself first, not for them. For the version of every relationship, this one or the next, that you actually deserve to be present for. Because the most magnetic thing you will ever be is not the person who loved them the hardest. It is the person who loved themselves enough to become someone worth returning to. We've talked about stillness. We've talked about wholeness. We've talked about the profound, underestimated work of regulating your own nervous system so that you become someone whose presence signals safety rather than storm. Now I want to bring you to something that operates on a different level entirely. Something that doesn't live in the realm of psychology or neuroscience, though both will confirm it. Something that lives in the space between what is said and what is felt, between what is visible and what is permanently, indelibly registered. I want to talk about how you disappear, because here is what almost nobody considers when they enter no contact. They think about the silence as an absence, as a void, as nothing happening. But the truth, and this is a truth that the avoidant understands better than almost anyone, because they have spent a lifetime paying attention to what people do when they are not performing, is that silence is not nothing. Silence is a statement, and the quality of that statement, the character it reveals, the dignity or desperation it carries, that is something the avoidant receives with absolute clarity, whether they ever acknowledge it or not. Think about every no contact you have ever witnessed end badly. The final message sent at midnight that started with, "I just need you to know." The social media post that was clearly designed to be seen by one specific person. The mutual friend casually contacted under the pretense of something unrelated. The slow deterioration of composure that plays out in ways both subtle and unmistakable to the person watching from a distance. These are not judgments. These are entirely human responses to an entirely human pain. But they are also communications. And what they communicate beneath the specific content of each one is a single message: your absence has destabilized me completely. And to the avoidant nervous system, that message is not endearing. It is not evidence of the depth of your love in a way that moves them closer. It is, in the most precise psychological sense, a confirmation of their original fear. That closeness with you means responsibility for your emotional state. That being loved by you means being needed by you in a way that has no boundary, no bottom, no place where their own needs are permitted to exist. Now contrast that with something rarer, something that the avoidant encounters so infrequently that when they do, it stays with them in ways they cannot fully explain. The person who goes quiet, genuinely quiet, without the dramatic exit, without the manifesto, without the series of increasingly unraveling communications that map the exact trajectory of their pain. The person who, when the connection paused or broke, simply withdrew with grace, who honored themselves enough not to perform their suffering for an audience of one, who trusted that what was real between them was real enough to survive silence, and if it wasn't, that the silence itself was the answer they needed. That kind of disappearance is not cold. It is not indifferent. It does not mean the love wasn't there or that the loss isn't felt. It means that the person experiencing the loss has a relationship with their own dignity that supersedes even their grief. And dignity self-possessed, unperformed, quietly unshakable dignity is one of the most arresting qualities a human being can carry. Particularly to someone like the avoidant, who has spent years watching people collapse under the weight of emotional need, and who has, perhaps unconsciously, been waiting for proof that it is possible to love deeply without losing oneself entirely in the process. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. And while he was not writing about attachment theory or no contact dynamics, the principle translates with striking precision. Because the only thing you have genuine dominion over in this entire situation is how you carry yourself through it, not whether they come back, not how long the silence lasts, not what they are thinking in the privacy of their own internal world. Only this: the quality of your own conduct, the integrity of your own behavior, the story that your silence tells about who you are when no one is watching and nothing is guaranteed. The avoidant is watching. Perhaps not in the ways you imagine. Perhaps not obsessively, not obviously, not in ways they would ever admit. But the person who meant something to them does not simply cease to exist in their internal world because external contact has stopped. The avoidant mind, for all its practiced detachment, carries the people it has genuinely connected with in a private, persistent way that their outward behavior rarely reflects. And what gets carried, what gets replayed, what gets examined in the quiet moments when the defenses are down is not the grand gestures. It is not the passionate declarations or the elaborate attempts at reconnection. It is the texture of who you were, the quality of your presence, and critically, the grace with which you handled the hardest moments, including this one. So let the silence be clean. Let it be deliberate. Let it carry the weight of someone who knows their own worth so completely that they do not need to argue for it, perform it, or prove it to someone who is not yet in a position to fully receive it. Let your disappearance say the thing that no message, however perfectly crafted, could ever say as powerfully: that you are someone who can be loved without being managed, someone who can feel pain without becoming it, someone who understands at the deepest level that real love does not beg. The loudest thing you will ever say to an avoidant is nothing at all, delivered with every ounce of your dignity intact. We have moved through stillness, through wholeness, through the architecture of a regulated nervous system, through the profound and underestimated power of a graceful disappearance. Each of these points has been building towards something, a cumulative understanding that is more than the sum of its parts. And now we arrive at what I believe is the most psychologically sophisticated and the most personally demanding insight in this entire conversation. Because everything we have discussed so far can be done, at least partially, as a strategy. Stillness can be performed. Wholeness can be constructed for an audience. Nervous system regulation can be pursued with an ulterior motive underneath it. Dignity can be worn like a costume. And the avoidant, whose entire survival system was built on detecting inauthenticity, on sensing the gap between what people present and what they actually feel, will identify every single one of those performances with a precision that is almost unsettling. Which is why this point is not about what you do, it is about where you actually arrive. Let's be honest about what most no contact really is beneath the surface. Most no contact is not genuine release. It is a strategy dressed in the clothing of release. It is the decision to stop reaching out, paired with the secret, persistent hope that the stopping will produce a specific result, that the silence will be loud enough to wake something in them, that the absence will create the longing that the presence couldn't. That if you just hold out long enough, maintain the discipline long enough, resist the urge to reach out long enough, they will come back, and everything will be different. And the love will finally be what you always knew it could be. I am not saying that hope is wrong. Hope is human. Hope is, in many circumstances, the thing that keeps people moving forward through genuine darkness. But I want you to look very carefully at what that specific hope is doing to you, and more importantly, what it is communicating to the avoidant, whether contact has stopped or not. Because hope that is secretly contingent, hope that says I am letting go, but only until you return, is not release. It is the longest reach. It is pursuit in its most patient and therefore most invisible form. And the avoidant, who has a finely calibrated sensitivity to emotional undercurrents, does not need to be in contact with you to feel it. It lives in the energy of the occasional social media presence. It lives in the mutual connections through whom information quietly travels. It lives in the version of you that has technically stopped reaching out, but has not, in any real internal sense, stopped waiting. And waiting, patient, hopeful, secretly conditional waiting, is still dependency. It is still the emotional weight that the avoidant felt before the silence began. It has simply changed its form. So what does genuine release actually look like? And how do you get there when every part of you is resisting it? It starts with a distinction that sounds simple and is anything but: the distinction between detachment and indifference. Indifference is the absence of feeling. It is what people sometimes perform when they want to appear as though they have moved on. It is cold, it is brittle, and it is transparent to anyone paying attention. Detachment is something entirely different. Detachment is the full presence of feeling the love, the grief, the loss, the genuine appreciation for what was real, held without the compulsive need to control its outcome. It is caring deeply and simultaneously releasing your grip on what that caring is supposed to produce. The Buddhist concept of non-attachment is not, as it is often misunderstood, a call to stop loving. It is a call to love without ownership, to be fully present in the experience of connection without demanding that the connection conform to a specific shape, a specific timeline, a specific result. And when applied to this dynamic, when you genuinely arrive at a place where your investment in this person is real, but your need for a particular outcome has dissolved, something changes in your entire energetic presentation that no amount of strategic behavior could replicate. You become, for perhaps the first time in this dynamic, genuinely free. And freedom, authentic, unperformed, internally verified freedom, is the single most disarming thing you can offer someone whose entire psychology is organized around the fear of being trapped. Think about what the avoidant has always been running from: the loss of self, the suffocation of autonomy. The sense that love comes with invisible chains that will slowly, imperceptibly tighten until there is no room left to breathe. Every relationship they have ever been in has, to varying degrees, confirmed that fear. Because when people love the avoidant, they tend to need things from them: reassurance, consistency, emotional reciprocity, all of which are legitimate needs but which, from the avoidance perspective, accumulate into pressure, into the slow erosion of the space they require to feel like themselves. But a person who has genuinely released the outcome carries none of that pressure. Their love is offered freely, without invoice. Their presence, if and when it returns, asks nothing in return for its warmth. And their absence, their genuine, peaceful, non-strategic absence, creates something in the avoidance internal world that pursuit never could. It creates space, real space. Not the space the avoidant manufactured through withdrawal, which always carried the low hum of someone waiting on the other side of it, but space that is inhabited by someone who is genuinely, contentedly living their own life and who, from that fullness, still carries a quiet warmth for what was shared. That is the person the avoidant thinks about, not the one who waited, not the one who strategized, not the one whose silence was a held breath, the one who let go fully, cleanly, with love, and in doing so, became the only kind of person the avoidant has ever genuinely wanted to return to. William Blake wrote that he who binds to himself a joy does the winged life destroy. But he who kisses the joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise. The avoidant is, in many ways, the winged life. And every attempt to bind them, however loving, however justified, however desperately well-intentioned, destroys the very thing you are trying to hold. Release is not giving up on love. Release is finally loving in the only language that the avoidant soul has ever been able to truly hear. We have traveled a significant distance together in this conversation. We began with stillness, the counterintuitive power of stopping the chase. We moved through wholeness, through nervous system regulation, through the dignity of a graceful disappearance, through the profound and demanding work of genuine release. Each point has been a layer. Each insight has been building toward something larger than itself. And now we arrive at the final point, the one that ties everything together. The one that is not really about the avoidant at all. The one that is, at its core, entirely about you. Let me say something that might be the most important thing I say in this entire conversation. No contact, when it is entered unconsciously, when it is simply the cessation of communication without any internal intention behind it, is just absence. It is time passing. It is silence without meaning. And silence without meaning produces nothing except more of the same pain in a quieter environment. But no contact entered with intention, no contact understood as a laboratory, as a crucible, as the exact conditions required to forge a version of yourself that did not exist before this relationship broke open, that is something else entirely. That is one of the most transformative opportunities a human being can be given. And the tragedy is that most people spend it waiting, watching, wondering, rather than doing the only thing that will actually change the trajectory of everything that comes after: growing. Now I want to be precise about what growth means in this context, because the word is used so casually that it has lost much of its weight. Growth is not the performance of healing. It is not the curated social media presence that signals to a watching world and perhaps one specific person that you are thriving. Not the new gym membership that lasts 3 weeks, or the journaling practice that fills 4 pages before it quietly disappears. These things are not without value, but they are not growth. They are the surface activity that sometimes precedes growth, and just as often substitutes for it. Real growth is the willingness to look at what this relationship revealed about you, not about them, and to do something honest with what you find. Because every relationship, and particularly every painful one, is a mirror. It shows you things about your own patterns, your own unresolved wounds, your own attachment architecture that comfort and stability never could. The anxiety you felt when they pulled away, where does that live in your history before them? The way you shrunk yourself to accommodate their discomfort, when did you first learn that your needs were too much? The moments you abandoned your own instincts in favor of keeping the peace, what early experience taught you that your voice was less important than someone else's comfort? These are not easy questions. They are not the questions you want to be sitting with when you are already in pain. But they are the questions that, if answered honestly, if pursued with genuine courage, and perhaps the support of a skilled therapist or trusted guide, will fundamentally alter not just this relationship, but every relationship that follows. Because the patterns that brought you here, the anxious attachment, the tendency to overinvest in emotionally unavailable people, The willingness to negotiate your own worth in exchange for inconsistent affection. Those patterns did not begin with this person, and they will not end with this person, unless you decide that this moment of rupture is also a moment of reckoning. Erik Erikson wrote about the concept of post-traumatic growth, the documented psychological phenomenon, in which individuals who navigate genuine crisis with conscious intention emerge not merely recovered but fundamentally expanded, more self-aware, more emotionally sophisticated, more capable of the kind of deep, grounded intimacy that they could not access before the crisis forced them to grow into it. And what the research consistently shows is that the growth is not the result of the pain itself. Pain alone does not produce growth. It is the meaning made from the pain. The conscious decision to use the rupture as raw material rather than simply enduring it as tragedy. This is the decision that no contact is asking you to make. And here is where we come back to the avoidant, because this is a conversation about them and what they secretly want and what actually moves them. The avoidant has, in almost every case, a highly developed relationship with their own interior world. Their self-sufficiency is not just a defense mechanism. It is also a genuine orientation toward personal autonomy and self-development that they value deeply and consistently look for, often without conscious awareness, in the people they choose to let close. When the avoidant assesses whether return is safe, whether vulnerability is worth the risk, whether the person they withdrew from is someone they can genuinely build something with, they are not asking whether that person still loves them. They already know the answer to that question. What they are asking, what the avoidant's nervous system is genuinely evaluating, is whether anything has changed, whether the dynamic that made closeness feel like danger has shifted, whether the person on the other side of the silence has done anything with the distance beyond simply surviving it, whether there is something new to come back to, something more spacious, something that feels less like the relationship that activated all of their oldest fears and more like the relationship that might finally, carefully, with both people more equipped than they were before, feel like genuine home. And you cannot manufacture that newness. You cannot perform it or argue for it or demonstrate it through a perfectly composed message. It either exists or it doesn't. It is either real or it isn't. And whether it is real depends entirely on whether you use this time to actually become it. This is the deepest truth of no contact, and the one that most people are not ready to hear until they have exhausted every other interpretation. The avoidant does not need you to wait for them. They do not need you to strategize for them, or suffer for them, or hold yourself in suspension for them. What they need, what would genuinely shift the internal calculus that determines whether return is possible, is for you to have used the distance to become someone who no longer needs the relationship to be different in order to be okay. Someone who grew, specifically and visibly and authentically, in the exact areas that the relationship revealed as unfinished. Someone who arrived at the other side of the silence not as a better version of who they were before, but as a genuinely different person, one for whom love is no longer a rescue operation, but a conscious, grounded, freely given choice. That person is not who you were when the silence began, but they are absolutely who you are capable of becoming within it. No contact is not a waiting room. It never was. It is the most rigorous, most honest, most potentially transformative laboratory you will ever step into. And what you build inside it, not for them, not as a strategy, not as a performance, but for yourself, from yourself, because you finally decided that you deserve the fullest possible version of your own life. That is what changes everything. Not just whether they come back, but whether, when they do, you are standing in a place worth returning to. And whether, if they don't, you have built something so genuinely alive within yourself that their absence, however felt, however real, no longer has the power to define you. The relationship revealed the work. No contact is. Where you do it. And the person you become on the other side of that work, that is the beginning of everything that actually lasts.